Hey guys, tonight we embark on perhaps the least glamorous adventure you'll ever have the misfortune and mild delight of experiencing a day in the shoes, or rather the squelchy boots, of a Scottish Highland Leech collector. You wake before dawn, in a one-room stone croft so drafty it whistles lullabies through the thatch. The air smells like last night's peat smoke and damp wool, and something vaguely fungal. Your bones ache, not from age or barely 40, but from the daily hobby of standing knee-deep in freezing bogs while being used as a buffet by medicinal bloodsuckers. Romantic, isn't it? You rub sleep from your eyes with fingers that feel more like old turnips than flesh. A small fire crackles half-heartedly in the hearth, doing very little to warm the room. Through the one-smeared window, the world outside looks like it's been soaked in dirty dishwater gray sky, gray grass, gray prospects. It's the Highlands in spring, which means mud with a side of more mud, and a breeze that could sandpaper your soul. And yes, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for the soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first task of your miserable day is getting out from under the 3 itchy wool blankets that barely kept you alive overnight. You do it reluctantly, one toe at a time, with the speed of a man condemned to the wettest punishment job history could devise. The floor's cold stone. Your feet immediately regret their involvement. You dress in layers that are all technically clean, meaning they don't actively crunch. Your underclothes are patched more times than a government promise, and your overshirt smells vaguely like boiled cabbage. A scarf, knitted by a cousin you haven't spoken to since the Great Kilt Argument of 1803, completes the ensemble. Your boots, the boots are as waterproof as a lace doily and twice as absorbent. The morning routine is an exercise in both patience and resistance to mildew. You try to wash your face using rainwater from a cracked basin, but the water's colder than betrayal and smells of metal. Still, cleanliness is next to godliness, or at least it is in sermons. In the bogs, it's more of a suggestion. Outside, the mist hangs low and thick, making the hills look like they have pulled blankets over their heads to avoid the day. A single sheep bleats in the distance, the only creature more miserable than you. There's a sense that even the birds have hit snooze and opted for a duvet day, but you don't have that luxury. Historians still argue whether leech collectors were officially part of the medical profession or simply tolerated as a necessary nuisance. Either way, your role is one of those unsung, underpaid, and overbitten jobs that keep the gears of civilization oozing along. And so your day begins. The fire hisses as you place a small iron pot atop the embers. Breakfast is porridge, again, thick, pale, and cement-like. It glares at you from the bowl as if aware of its own mediocrity. You chew it with enthusiasm of someone eating a debt. For excitement, you sprinkle on a bit of dried nettle, which adds both crunch and regret. It's not that the meal is bad, though it is, but that it's also the best thing you'll eat all day. You chew slowly, letting your eyes wander the cottage walls. They're decorated with practical items: a rusted horseshoe, a wooden spoon, a badly drawn sketch of a dog that might be your cousin Ewan. In one corner, your leech kit rests, always packed and ready like a soldier's gear, though considerably smellier. As the last spoonful of porridge congeals on your tongue, You sigh. Time to begin. You check the kit. Inside are cloth pouches stiff with salt, a glass jar with a ragged cork lid, several strands of waxed twine, and a long stick with a notch at the end, lovingly dubbed the Wriggler Wrangler. There's also a small, leather-bound notebook where you record leech counts, weather patterns, and occasional haikus about mud. A letter from the apothecary in Inverness is folded at the bottom of the bag. She wants 30 healthy specimens by week's end, preferably dark-bellied and active. You're behind quota. The leeches aren't biting like they used to, or rather, they're biting you, just not staying long enough to catch. Quirky tidbit of the day in some Highland households. Leeches were also kept as pets, kept in jars on windowsills like living lava lamps. Children would name them, much to the horror of their visiting cousins. You shoulder your bag, tighten your scarf, and steel yourself against the damp promise of the moor. As you open the door, a gust of wind greets you like a slap with a wet kipper. Somewhere, a raven cackles. You wonder briefly if it's laughing at your life choices. Step by cold, squelching step, you begin your trudge into the mire. The path you follow isn't really a path, more a memory of where drier ground once dared to exist. Every footstep is a gamble. Will it be squelchingly soft, alarmingly firm, or that special kind of deceptive, where what appears to be solid is actually just a thin crust over a puddle deep enough to question your will to live? A fine drizzle settles over you like a clingy ghost. It's the kind of rain that doesn't fall so much as it hovers, waiting patiently to seep into your collar. The Highland mist is a master at infiltration. It finds the folds in your scarf, the cracks in your boots, the stubborn optimism in your soul, and quietly drowns them all. Your destination this morning is Loch Dubh, a nearby body of water whose name literally means Black Lake. Apt, really, since it looks like someone poured ink over a hole and dared it to sparkle. The loch is a known breeding ground for medicinal leeches, which, according to the barmaid at the tavern, have more job security than the king's hairdresser. You're not sure if that's true, but you cling to the hope that today might bring a decent haul. As you slog forward, the smells of the moor rise around you. Wet heather, old sheep, and that mysterious earthy tang that might be peat or might be something no one dares to name. You slip once on a hidden rock and catch yourself by grabbing a clump of moss, which then gives way. Because of course it does. Your knee lands in a puddle. The puddle laughs. And still, you walk. A historical fact to anchor your suffering during the 18th and 19th centuries. Leeches were considered essential to balancing bodily humors. Bloodletting wasn't just fashionable, it was medical doctrine. You, humble collector, are a vital cog in this ill-conceived machine of healthcare, helping to drain people of their life essence in the name of healing. Congratulations. Eventually, you reach a familiar bent willow by the water's edge. The tree leans like it, too, has given up hope. You pat it in greeting, as is your habit, and set down your gear on a relatively dry rock, a small miracle. Loch Dubh stretches before you, still and ominous. A low fog skims the surface, hiding the ripples that hint at leechy movement below. You sit, stretch your legs, and contemplate the philosophical question: what separates a professional from a fool? Is it the certificate, the paycheck, or simply the willingness to be repeatedly bitten in service of a society that thinks you smell funny? You pull out the Wriggler Wrangler and test its notch. Still good. The jar uncracked, though stained. The cloth pouches slightly mildewed, but functional. You take a deep breath, steeling yourself for what comes next. Here's a curious aside. Some collectors swore by singing to the leeches to lure them out. Ballads, folk tunes, even the occasional limerick. You hum a bit of the skyboat song under your breath, mostly to keep your spirits up, and step closer to the water. Then the boots come off. Cold hits you like a clan war. Your toes curl, offended by the very concept of liquid this frigid. You mutter something that isn't technically profanity, but still earns a scandalized look from a passing duck. With pant legs rolled up to the knees and skin already pimpling in protest, you step into the loch. Each squelch is a new sensory nightmare. The mud sucks at your soles, the reeds tangle around your ankles, and somewhere, something slick brushes your calf with the casual intimacy of a forgotten lover. You yelp quietly and carry on. Standing still is part of the art. You must remain motionless, pretending to be just another waterlogged bit of scenery, while the leeches do their slow, slimy approach. You count breaths, each clouding in the morning chill, and wait. After 15 minutes, the first visitor arrives. It attaches to your shin with the lazy confidence of a pub regular finding their usual seat. You note its size decent and use your stick to gently coax it into the jar. It resists. You insist. The stick wins. Historians still argue whether the leech craze was driven more by genuine medical belief or by economic opportunism, since apothecaries could sell jars of the little vampires for handsome sums, especially to city doctors panicked by plagues or nobled with too much blood and not enough hobbies. By the time the second leech finds you, your legs are numb and your patience thinner than your breakfast porridge. You mutter something soothing, though possibly delirious, and guide the creature into the cloth pouch. Your tally so far: 2 leeches, 3 bites, 1 existential crisis. Just as you're considering a strategic retreat, a rustle in the reeds distracts you. A plump rabbit hops into view, eyes wide, fur puffed against the damp. You lock eyes for a moment, 2 creatures equally confused by their life choices, and then it hops away. You shift slightly, regretting it instantly as a particularly enthusiastic leech clamps onto your ankle. This one's a biter. You wince, pry it off, and deposit it into the jar with a muttered promise to name it after your cousin Angus, the one who once tried to sell you a lucky bogstone that turned out to be sheep dung. Eventually, your knees start to tremble from cold, your fingers lose their grip, and the drizzle intensifies into what might generously be called a moisture tantrum. You step gingerly out of the water, your skin blotchy, your spirit sodden. You sit on the rock, inspect your jar 4 leeches, not terrible, and wring out your socks. They squelch like dying frogs. You sigh deeply, and the moor sighs back. You hobble back up the slope from Loch Dubh, feet squishing in rhythm with each resentful step. Your boots, hastily redonned and now housing at least 1 uninvited swamp creature, squelch in protest. Every so often, you pause to shake a sock or extract a rogue pebble, though at this point, you're convinced the pebbles are staging a mutiny. The path ahead winds between tufts of heather and tufts of regret. The sky, ever the drama queen, darkens ominously, hinting at either rain or an existential reckoning. You grunt softly and adjust the strap of your leech kit, which digs into your shoulder with the tenacity of a debtor's guilt. It's time to talk gear. The leech kit is a humble thing, but essential, your companion, your livelihood, your smelly sidekick. It contains precisely what the job demands: a jar, sometimes more than 1. If the harvest is generous or you're feeling optimistic, a length of twine for tying pouches closed, strips of coarse cloth used to line the jars or dab your wounds. And, of course, the all-important Wriggler Wrangler, a stick carved with loving frustration into a shape that's mostly functional and only occasionally embarrassing to explain. Some collectors added a small mirror to reflect sunlight into the water, attracting leeches by mimicking the shimmer of fish scales. Others carried no tools at all, relying solely on bare skin and cussedness. You, however, are a man of practicality, not bravado. Your motto: if something's biting you, it may as well be profitable. Midway back toward the main moor track, you find yourself standing at the crest of a small hill, surveying the terrain. A carpet of moss and lichen sprawls beneath your feet, damp and springy. To your left, the bog stretches into a ripple of watery pools. To your right, a thicket of scraggly gorse looks like it might whisper rude things if given a voice. You pause for a bite of cold oat bannock, chewy, bland, and riddled with mystery seeds. It sticks to your teeth and soul alike. Just as you're considering a detour to avoid the gorse because no one needs an impromptu leg exfoliation today, you spot movement ahead. A stag, a ghost. No, it's old Fiona, the local herbalist, striding through the mist like a peat-powered banshee. She doesn't see you, which is for the best, as last time you met she accused you of stealing her nettle infusion recipe. You didn't, of course. Yours was time. Entirely different. With that close call avoided, you trudge onward toward your next collection site, the North Marsh, infamous among leech collectors for its density of wildlife, most of it unfriendly. The marsh is deeper and darker than Loch Dubh, and legend holds it once swallowed a horse-hole saddle and all. Quirky tidbit time: some 19th century collectors believed that leeches had moods. Broody leeches wouldn't bite, flighty ones would escape the jar. There was even talk of a melancholic leech that refused to feed during storms. It's unclear if the leech was melancholic or just better at weather forecasting than the humans around it. As you near the marsh, a chill wind snakes across your neck, bringing with it the scent of brackish water and questionable decisions. The reeds rustle like they're gossiping. You brace yourself for another round of involuntary aquatic immersion. At the marsh's edge, you kneel to test the bank. It squishes. Reluctantly holding your weight, you inch forward, using your stick to probe for depth. The surface bubbles faintly, either gases escaping from below or some creature sighing at your arrival. You roll up your trousers again, grimacing as your skin prickles in anticipation. One sock slides down inside your boot like a treacherous eel. With a quiet sigh, you enter the water. This time, it's colder, slimier, the kind of cold that seeps into bone and quietly files a complaint. But you stand still, a statue of mild despair, and wait for the leeches to notice. And they do. The first one is eager, squirming onto your foot with what could only be described as gusto. The second one clings halfway up your shin, and you nearly lose your balance twisting to retrieve it. You wobble, you curse softly again, PG-13, and you manage not to fall, though your dignity is already halfway to drowning. You collect 3 more, slowly and stiffly, whispering encouragements that sound like folk curses. That's it, wee beastie, into the jar with ye, no biting below the sock line. Historians still argue whether the leech trade declined due to overharvesting, new medical theories, or simply because people began to suspect that draining someone's blood to treat a headache was, in fact, wildly counterproductive. But during your time, business is still just barely brisk. Your fingers, now numb and tinged a romantic shade of violet, fumble with the cork stopper. One leech wriggles rebelliously, trying to escape. You plug the jar just in time, muttering, "Not today," slippery. As you step back onto solid-ish ground, you realize your boot is leaking. Again, probably that damned rock you didn't notice earlier. You sit down heavily on a patch of moss and begin the tedious process of unlacing everything while pretending your toes aren't plotting mutiny. You lean back, catching your breath. Above you, the clouds shift and break for just a moment, allowing a shaft of pale sunlight to touch the marsh. It glitters faintly on the surface of the water. You sigh, a sound halfway between awe and exhaustion. And then you sneeze, violently. Several birds startle from a nearby tree. One poops in your general direction. With the midday collection complete and your socks once again soaked in both water and disappointment, you pack up your gear. The jar sloshes gently, full of wriggling success. You allow yourself a small smile and wonder if, perhaps, this is what victory feels like. It isn't. With your modestly wriggling haul safely tucked into its pouch and your toes pruned into little bog raisins, you set off from the marsh. The sun, in one of its rare Highland appearances, peeks through a slit in the gray clouds, casting a faint golden light over the heather. It's almost picturesque, if you ignore the fact that your left boot now squelches on the offbeat, like a drunk tambourine. The trail ahead is more of a soggy suggestion than a road. You follow the line of gnarled rowan trees, known locally as witch trees. Superstition says they keep away evil spirits, though given your luck today, you suspect they might just be freeloading. As you trudge on, your mind drifts, the way it often does when the only soundtrack is wind and boot squelch. You recall how you came to this life, not exactly a calling, more of a tripping hazard into necessity. Your Uncle Hamish, may he rest in bog, had taught you the trade. He claimed it was honest work, though his definition of honesty often involved bartering leeches for moonshine. It was during those early days that you learned the anatomy of a Highland bog, part sponge, part trap, and entirely determined to eat your lunch. The ground here is a living thing, heaving, squelching, whispering in strange voices if you listen too long. Some say the bog remembers every footstep. You say the bog mostly remembers where you last lost a boot. The vegetation is a layered cake of confusion. Sphagnum moss covers everything like a musty carpet. Beneath it, the soil is black, rich, and always moist, as though it dreams of being a pudding. Cotton grass waves cheerily in the breeze, its white tufts giving the illusion of snow, while bladderwort and sundew plants lurk quietly, consuming insects like dainty executioners. You pause to rest near a flat patch of ground where a half-buried log offers a surprisingly comfortable seat. Here, you open your notebook, its pages slightly warped from a prior run-in with a stream, and jot a few notes. Weather damp, emotional, leeches moody but cooperative, mood speculative. You flip back a few pages and find a haiku you'd penned last week. Legs in the water, leech bites, mild frostbite, and yet still better than town. The town, you reflect, is not much better. Noise, soot, suspicious meat pies, and worse, the barber surgeons, your primary clientele, have no appreciation for the art of leech collection. To them, you're just a peddler with jars. They don't see the planning, the weather reading, the sheer patience it takes to stand still while becoming a buffet. Historians still argue whether the Highland leeching trade was ever truly organized. Some claim guilds were formed, others say it remained the realm of eccentric loners and desperate cousins. You tend to believe the latter after all. Your guild meetings usually involve muttering to yourself in the fog. A rustle in the underbrush jolts you. Your hand instinctively grabs your stick, but it's only a toad, bulbous and disgruntled, hopping in an unconvincing zigzag. You nod solemnly. "Fair day to ye, sir," you murmur, because frankly, a toad is better company than half your neighbors. You shoulder your bag once more and take the long way around a particularly ominous puddle, one that recently claimed Murdo's right boot and hasn't returned it. As you go, your foot brushes against something unnatural. You stop, crouch, and gently clear away the moss to reveal a rusted tin whistle. An odd find, this far out. You pocket it either a relic or a curse. Time will tell. Quirky bit of folklore here in some parts of the Highlands. It was believed that playing music near a bog could either summon leeches or scare them off, depending on your tune. Some collectors reportedly played lullabies to keep their haul calm. You imagine explaining this to a city physician and smile at the likely reaction. Your break is over. The path ahead narrows between two stony ridges. You adjust your belt, shift the jar to the other side, and proceed into the narrowing trail. The wind picks up, funneling between the rocks like a whispering gallery. You imagine voices again. One of them sounds like Aunt Mary, scolding you for never finishing anything useful. You mutter back, "I finish my leech rounds, don't I?" The landscape opens suddenly, revealing a shallow dip in the moor dotted with standing water and sullen crows. This area is rich with promise, or so you hope. You kneel and skim the surface with your stick, watching for movement. Nothing yet. Perhaps the leeches are having a union meeting. Then you feel it, that subtle tug on your right shin light, but definite. You grin, an expression rarely seen out here. Carefully, you guide another leech into your jar, murmuring something vaguely flattering. The sun dips behind a passing cloud, dimming the landscape into soft grays and golds. The bog begins to hum with evening energy, buzzing insects, rustling reeds, the occasional plop of an unseen frog cannonballing into a puddle. You sigh deeply and stand. Your back cracks like a twig. You shake out your legs, relace your boots, and continue along the ridge, jar heavier, spirit slightly lighter. Another day, another few ounces of wiggling commerce. Still, there's something comforting in the rhythm. You walk, you wait, you get bitten. You walk some more. A slow dance with nature's slipperiest companions. And as the trail rises toward the horizon, you catch a glimpse of the village steeple in the distance. Home is still a couple of hours away, but the worst part of the day might just be behind you. At least until you remember what's for lunch. Lunch, as it turns out, is neither a comfort nor a surprise. You find your usual lunch spot, a flattened patch of moss beneath a bent pine tree that creaks with the weight of either age or judgment. There's a rock, vaguely seat-shaped, where you've carved a small notch over the years for easier sitting. It's the closest thing to a dining nook a leech collector might expect. You reach into your bag and pull out the parcel, a cloth-wrapped bundle, slightly soggy from bog mist, heavy with resignation. Inside a turnip, raw, not sliced, not roasted, certainly not seasoned, just a cold, humble turnip, the color of mild despair. You stare at it for a moment, then bite in, It's crunchy, bland, and faintly reminiscent of dirt, which is fair, as that's likely where it spent most of its life. You chew slowly, eyes on the mid-distance, contemplating whether chewing in your sleep might qualify as multitasking. For variation, there's a heel of oatcake, tough as bark and mysteriously warm despite the chill air. You nibble carefully, wondering whether the slight sweetness is honey or just mold with ambition. Around you, the moor murmurs. Midges begin their lunchtime descent, those minuscule tyrants of the Highlands, buzzing in clouds so thick you could almost mistake them for weather. You pull your scarf higher, breathe through your nose, and swat gently at the air, performing the traditional midge waltz. Historians still argue whether midges influenced Highland settlement patterns. Some believe entire villages relocated to avoid the biting swarms, especially in the warm, wet months. Others claim it was the threat of English taxation, or the price of herring. But one thing's certain, no one ever settled in a midge hotspot on purpose. You wave one away from your ear and take another bite of turnip. It squeaks between your teeth. The sound is deeply unsatisfying. In moments like this, you start to fantasize, not about fame or riches, those are as distant as summer sunshine, but about other jobs. Perhaps a chimney sweep in Edinburgh. You'd be cleaner at the end of the day, oddly enough, or a crofter planting potatoes, arguing with sheep, getting to sit down more often. There was a brief flirtation with the idea of becoming a fiddler, but you lack rhythm and coordination. Plus, a traveling fiddler you once met stole your spoon. You've never quite forgiven the profession. You finish your lunch slowly, savoring the final crumbs of oatcake as if they might surprise you with flavor. They don't. A passing breeze carries the scent of wet pine and distant livestock. Somewhere far off, a cow moos long, low, and existential. As you pack away the cloth wrap, you notice something odd, a faint print in the moss nearby. Not yours. Too large for a dog, too narrow for a deer. You frown, lean in, and brush aside some heather. Another print, boots, fresh. You glance around, senses prickling. No sign of anyone. Perhaps Murdo is lurking again, hoping to intercept your haul and barter with a shifty butcher who trades sausages for leeches. Murdo once claimed his leeches were spiritually superior to yours. You suspect he bathes them in whiskey. You set your jaw and cinch the bag tighter. Your leeches are clean, honest leeches, raised in humble filth and carried through adversity. You won't have them insulted. The sun shifts overhead, casting the moor in late afternoon gold. Shadows stretch long, and you realize it's time to begin the long trudge back to the village. As you walk, you reflect on the curious economy that supports your soggy trade. The leeches you collect today will be sold tomorrow, often to apothecaries, barber surgeons, or ambitious physicians. They're used for bloodletting, believed to draw out everything from fevers to melancholia. One particularly enthusiastic doctor swore they cured marital discontent, though his wife was less convinced. Some even send the creatures down south, where Londoners pay good coin for jars of Highland-born leeches, thinking them hardier, more vigorous, more Scottish. There's a sort of romanticism to it. You suppose, though, you suspect they'd change their minds if they had to extract one from their underpants, as you had to just last week. Here's a fringe tidbit for you in certain Highland hamlets. Leeches were believed to cure not only bodily ailments, but bad dreams. Children with nightmares were made to wear a tiny leech jar around their neck at night. It rarely worked, and sometimes led to wet beds and very confused leeches. The path narrows again as you descend into a gully lined with damp ferns and sleepy birds. You take slow steps, feeling the weight of the day in your thighs, your back, your patience. Halfway down, your boot slips, and you lurch forward, catching yourself with a hand against a rock. A sharp sting nettles. Of course, you mutter softly and suck on your finger like an indignant toddler. The leech jar, miraculously, remains intact. You pause there, heart thudding slightly, and look out over the moor below. It's quiet, peaceful, even. The sort of place that would make a lovely painting if you left out the part where you spend your day being chewed on. The breeze shifts, and you catch the scent of wood smoke. The village isn't far now. You straighten, shift your pack, and press on. By the time you crest the last rise before the village outskirts, your boots have stopped squeaking. They've moved on to squelching with an air of resignation. A crow watches you from a fence post, cocking its head like it's never seen a man so impressively damp. You tip your cap to it. You believe in politeness, even toward judgmental birds. The familiar shapes of cottages appear through the thinning mist, each with its own lean or lurch, as if trying to escape the wind. The smell of peat smoke thickens in the air, curling from chimneys and seeping into your nostrils with the warmth of something almost inviting. You quicken your pace, not quite a sprint, but more than a trudge, a sort of hopeful limp. You're almost home when it happens. It begins with a hum, a rising, whining hum, too high-pitched to be machinery, and far too angry to be benign. You freeze mid-step, eyes wide, nostrils flaring in primal recognition. Midges, they descend like a biblical punishment, 1,000 tiny wings flapping with the energy of the truly spiteful. You fumble for your scarf, wrapping it around your nose and mouth like a bank robber with low standards. Your hands wave furiously, but it's no use. They're in your ears, your eyes. One tries to colonize your nostril. You bolt for the nearest building an old byre, long since converted into a potato shed, and fling yourself through the door, slamming it behind you. Darkness swallows you, interrupted only by the sound of your own panicked breathing and the faint thunk of your leech jar hitting the floor. Miraculously, it stays closed. You lean against the wall, panting. The midges thrum just outside, their tiny hunger vibrating against the wood. You peer through a crack and see them, swirling in demonic formation, disappointed but patient. You'll have to wait them out. Historians still argue whether the infamous Highland midge plague of 1832 actually drove local populations to invent face nets, or if it was a later Victorian embellishment. What's undeniable is that every Highlander has their own midge battle story, and none of them are heroic. You take a seat on a dusty barrel and begin inspecting your jar for casualties. One leech is doing somersaults. Another appears to be sulking. You tap the glass gently and murmur soothing nothings. You need them in good spirits for the marketplace. To pass the time, you hum a tune, a sleepy little Gaelic lullaby your grandmother used to sing when trying to convince children that porridge counted as dessert. The acoustics of the potato shed are surprisingly pleasant, and the leeches seem to calm, bobbing gently in time with your voice. As the buzz outside dies down, you take the opportunity to repack your kit. Cloth pouches folded, stick cleaned and tied back with twine, jar wrapped in wool for warmth. You wipe your hands on your kilt and glance outside. The sun, in a rare show of generosity, has emerged fully. The midges, foiled by your shed shelter strategy, have dispersed to plague some other poor soul. You step out cautiously, blink at the sudden light, and resume your journey with only a few involuntary twitches from leftover bites. The village is bustling, by Highland standards. 3 people are arguing over a sheep near the blacksmith. Someone is repairing a roof by shouting at it. A child chases a goose. The goose appears to be winning. You slip down a side lane, heading for the market square. It's little more than a widening of the road where carts gather. But today, a handful of traders have set up makeshift stalls, baskets of turnips, racks of drying fish, and jars of dubious preserves line the rickety tables. Your destination stands under a crooked awning made from old sails, the barber surgeon's stall. A thin man with a suspiciously white apron and a mustache like wilted straw looks up as you approach. His name is Mr. McVane, and he's both the village haircutter and the nearest thing to a physician. He once removed a tooth with a chisel. The man survived. "Ah, Leech boy," he says, squinting at your jar. "Got the good ones today. Have ye?" You nod, unscrewing the lid just enough to reveal the sluggish wriggle within. He peers in, tilting the jar this way and that. One leech makes a daring leap for freedom, but you catch it with reflexes honed by years of trauma. "I'll give you 5 pence the lot," McVane says. You stare at him. They're all dark-bellied, full of zest. I had to sing to them. 6 pence if you throw in that one doing backflips. You sigh, but nod. The barter dance continues as you tally the final sum, 7.5 pence. Enough for oats, a candle stub, and maybe a boiled sweet. Quirky tidbit in some towns. Barber surgeons hosted leech races for entertainment. Patrons would bet on whose leech reached a strip of bacon first. The winner got free bloodletting. Everyone else got mildly disappointed. As you hand over the jar, McVane drops the leeches into a larger container filled with what looks suspiciously like old gin. "Keeps 'em peppy," he says. By way of explanation, you make a note to never ask about his sanitation methods again. Transaction complete. You wander back through the square, coins clinking faintly in your pouch. The breeze carries scents of peat, sweat, and a hint of heather. A chicken pecks near your boots and looks up as if to ask, "That's it? That's your job?" You shrug. Some days, you wonder the same. You wander from the market square with coins in your pocket and a dull ache in your lower back that suggests either a brewing storm or just the accumulated indignity of spending your working hours as live bait. Either way, it's time for a brief pause before the final stretch home. The wind has picked up, whistling around the eaves like a gossiping crone. You tighten your scarf and meander toward the village's only tavern, a sagging stone building with a roof that seems to shift positions every few months. The faded sign swinging above the door reads, "The Gasping Stag." And if that doesn't perfectly sum up your posture right now, you don't know what does. Inside, the air is heavy with the mingled scent of peat smoke, spilled ale, and damp wool. A few locals sit hunched over mugs of something hot and questionably alcoholic. One of them nods to you, possibly in greeting, or possibly because he's asleep with his eyes open. You order a mug of something herbal from the barkeep, a broad woman named Elspeth, who could silence an argument with a single raised eyebrow. She slides you a steaming cup with a warning. Don't ask what's in it, just be glad it's hot. You sip. It tastes like time, sorrow, and a hint of pickled turnip. You decide not to press further. The tavern chatter is quiet today. Less roaring debate, more subdued grumbling. You catch snippets. told him it weren't a haggis, just a very angry hedgehog. Why'd have swore he saw a kelpie by the loch, but it might have just been Murdo's goat. English fella tried to buy a sporran made of actual sporran, and then the inevitable. So, how's the leeches, then? The question comes from a big Nile, a man of uncertain profession but undeniable volume. He grins at you over his mug, his beard frothy with something that looks like foam but might be broth. You sigh, sip again, and reply, wrathful and moist, like usual. He laughs so hard he nearly drops his drink. You smile faintly, enjoying the brief moment of camaraderie. For all its bleakness, the village has its moments of warmth, usually by the fire, often slightly pickled, but real nonetheless. Historians still argue whether Highland taverns function more as drinking establishments or informal community centers. In truth, they were both a place to hear news, share gossip, barter goods, and, if necessary, drink until you forgot what brought you in the first place. As you finish your mug, the tavern door swings open, letting in a gust of wind and an elderly man with a leaky gait and a pipe clamped between his teeth. He looks around, spots you, and waddles over with a wheezy chuckle. It's old Hammy, the unofficial historian of the village, and a man with a story for every tooth he's lost, which is most of them. You'll like this one, he says, lowering himself onto the bench beside you with the careful choreography of a man who once fell asleep in a peat cart. Heard tell of a lass from Strathnaver who swore her leeches were blessed by St. Columba himself, sold 'em for triple what they were worth. Did they work, you ask, half smiling? They cured a priest of his migraines and his sense of humor. Some say he never laughed again, but also never sneezed. You nod solemnly. Could be worth a prayer. Quirky tidbit in one dusty parish record. A leech collector in the 1780s applied for a license to officiate weddings, claiming leeches brought balance to any union. The request was denied with exceptional haste. Conversation flows, mostly harmless, occasionally absurd. You nurse your second mug of Elspeth's herbal concoction and allow the warmth to soak into your hands. For a brief, fleeting moment, you feel almost content. The aches haven't left. The bog is still waiting. And tomorrow promises the same dance of mud and midges, but just now, with laughter nearby and a fire crackling in the hearth, it all seems tolerable. Eventually, the fire burns low. The patrons drift homeward, and you rise with a groan that starts in your knees and ends somewhere near your earlobes. Elspeth waves you out with a cloth and a grunt that could mean goodbye or don't come back without coins. The air outside is colder now, but clear. Stars wink faintly above the ridgeline, and a moon, pale and unimpressed, hovers low. You walk slowly through the village, past shuttered windows and quiet chickens roosting where they probably shouldn't be. You take the long route home, cutting behind the mill and past the old grain shed that everyone says is haunted, but really just has bad insulation. The ground is soft beneath your feet, but not soaking. The night air smells of wet moss and chimney soot. You pass the blacksmith's forge, now dark and still, and pause at the well. It's quiet tonight, no voices, no footfalls, just you, the moon, and the faint squirm of leech memory in your bag. You reach your cottage just as the first fat raindrops begin to fall, splatting against the thatched roof with a weary sort of determination. The door creaks open on a protest, and you're greeted by the comforting aroma of damp wool and last week's stew. still lingering like a guest who doesn't quite know when to leave. Inside, it's not warm, exactly, but less cold than outside, which is all you can reasonably hope for. You set your leech kit on the table and shed your outer layers, scarf, belt, boots, each landing with a damp thud. Your socks, however, require peeling, and you consider for a moment whether removing them qualifies as an extreme sport. You light a small oil lamp, its flickering glow casting your shadow in heroic proportions across the wall. You look taller in silhouette, almost like a man who collects falcons instead of parasites. Almost. Now begins the careful process of unpacking your leech haul. You remove the jar from its wool wrap and inspect the contents. 6 leeches, still lively, though one appears to be staging a one-worm ballet. You gently tip them into their holding pouch, a linen bag soaked in a mix of rainwater and mild salt. Not enough to harm them, just enough to simulate the marshy conditions they love so dearly. You tie the pouch closed with twine and hang it from the rafters, where the temperature remains cool and consistent. Some say talking to them helps keep them calm. You don't usually, but tonight you offer a nod and a "well done, lads." One twitches in response. You're unsure if it's acknowledgement or indigestion. From your side pouch, you extract a ledger, your leech journal, meticulously updated despite the weather's best efforts. You flip to today's date and record the details: location, catch size, leech mood wary, and weather conditions gray with hints of betrayal. You include a note about the midge ambush, followed by a crude doodle of one mid-bite. Historians still argue whether leech record-keeping was widespread, or simply the obsessive behavior of a few enthusiastic outliers. Some surviving ledgers show poetic flourishes, marginalia about love lives, and in one case, a recipe for herring pudding that no one has dared recreate. With your gear cleaned and leeches settled, it's time for the most harrowing part of the evening: inspecting your own legs. You perch on a stool and roll up your trousers, revealing a patchwork of red marks, some fresh, some fading, all vaguely accusatory. You mutter a familiar phrase, equal parts encouragement and lament, and dab each spot with a bit of vinegar from a ceramic jar. The vinegar stings, the way truth does when delivered by your mother. You find one late-stage escapee clinging to your ankle with quiet optimism. You're late. You inform it, plucking it gently and depositing it into the pouch. It does a slow, aggrieved somersault on entry. You sit back with a sigh, watching the lamplight flicker on the wall. Outside, the rain intensifies, beating a gentle rhythm on the roof. You take a moment, as you always do, to reflect on the day. You've been bitten, rained on, insulted by a goose, outbargained by McVane, and half-chased by a cloud of winged rage. And yet, you're home. Your haul was decent. Your toes are mostly attached. Your jar did not explode. These are victories. Small but hard won. A quirky tidbit comes to mind in some parts of Eastern Europe. It was believed that leeches could absorb not just blood but sorrow, that by allowing them to bite, one could rid themselves of grief. If that were true, you'd be the most emotionally stable man in the Highlands. Sadly, your mood suggests otherwise. You rise and put on a kettle, adding dried nettles and a pinch of mint from a pouch by the hearth. The tea tastes like ambition and moss, but it warms your fingers. You cradle the mug as you lower yourself into your creaky wooden chair, your favorite spot, worn into the shape of a man perpetually surprised by how loud his knees are. The fire has burned down to glowing coals, but they still offer a whisper of warmth. You lean forward, poke it once for good measure, and let the silence wrap around you. Historians still debate whether Highlanders of your station found contentment in their lot or simply became experts in tolerating it. You suspect the truth is both. There's a quiet pride in surviving what the land throws at you, and in knowing the exact consistency of loch mud just from smell. You look to the rafters, where your leech pouch swings gently. Tomorrow, you'll walk another bog, maybe the western one, near the standing stone where the water's colder, but the midges less aggressive. Maybe you'll bring a new bait, raw liver. If the butcher's feeling generous, maybe you'll get lucky. Or maybe, as has happened before, you'll fall face first into a hidden pool and discover just how efficiently a waistcoat can hold water. But that's tomorrow. Tonight, you sip your tea, listen to the rain, and let the ache in your bones remind you that you've earned your rest. Just as your body begins to settle into the comforting mold of your old chair, a knock thuds against your door, not a polite tap, but the kind of knock that suggests urgency, poor impulse control, or both. You sigh the sigh of a man who has recently sat down and already regrets it. With a grunt and a click of your knees, you rise and unlatch the door. It swings open to reveal Murdo. Of course it's Murdo, wrapped in a damp cloak and grinning like he just invented fire. Murdo is your closest competitor in the highly unglamorous world of Highland Leech collection. He's older, smellier, and depending on whom you ask, either a genius or a lunatic, possibly both. He once tried to breed faster leeches by leaving them near a spinning wheel. The results were inconclusive and slightly unsettling. He pushes past you with the familiarity of a man who has mistaken your hospitality for fondness. "Evenin'," he says, shedding his cloak with a flourish and dumping it on your floor. "You'll never guess what I caught today." "Something fungal," you reply, locking the door behind him. He grins wider and produces a cloth pouch with all the ceremony of a man presenting a royal jewel. He opens it, and inside you admit, begrudgingly, is a very large leech, dark, glossy, and pulsing faintly like it's plotting world domination. You lean in. "That's abnormally large." "Aye," Murdo says proudly. "Found it near the old cow path by the standing stone. Must have been feeding on sheep for weeks. I've named it Bessie." You resist the urge to back away. Murdo plunks himself down at your table and begins to rummage in his own satchel, producing a bottle of something amber and questionably legal. "Thought we'd have a dram, for the catch, and for old time's sake." You hesitate, but only briefly. You fetch 2 chipped cups from the shelf and pour. The liquid smells like regret and medicinal herbs, but it burns the chill from your throat. You clink mugs and drink. Historians still argue whether rural Highlanders shared more stories or silence over such drinks. You'd argue the stories were louder, but the silences said more. Murdo launches into a tale. It's long, meandering, and wildly improbable, involving a fox, a minister, a cartwheel, and 3 pickled eggs. But you let it wash over you. You've heard versions of it before, each with slight improvements and increasingly unlikely geography. Tonight, the minister ends up in Aberdeen, which is a new twist. Between swigs and lies, the topic shifts to trade. You heard about the Inverness barber Murdo asks. "Paying double for leeches this month. Says the laird's got too much blood again." Again you ask, deadpan. Murdo nods. Keeps getting nosebleeds every time someone speaks French. Reckon it's political. You make a mental note Inverness is a long walk, but double the coin might mean new boots, or at least dry ones. Quirky tidbit for the evening one. Documented leech collector in 1806. Attempted to train his leeches to return to him after feeding, tying tiny bits of thread around their midsections. It ended poorly for all involved, especially the tailor. As Murdo drains his cup, he leans back and squints at your ceiling. "You ever wonder why we do it?" he asks. "The leechin'. I mean, not the drinkin', that one's obvious." You shrug. "It's honest work, sort of. But we could be doing anything. Shepherding, smuggling, teaching the English to pronounce lock properly." You smile. "Somebody's got to supply the bloodsuckers." Murdo nods solemnly, as if this is the answer he needed, and stands. Right then, off to the shed. Bessie gets cranky if she's not hung proper. You don't ask for clarification. Instead, you show him to the door, which groans in protest. Rain spatters your threshold as he steps into the night, his silhouette vanishing quickly into the mist, pouch swinging. You latch the door, shake your head, and return to your seat. The fire has dimmed to embers now, and your body reminds you that tomorrow will not arrive with any less dampness than today. You stretch your legs toward the hearth and stare at the flickering glow. Historians still debate whether men like you, modest, muddy, often mistaken for vagrants, made up the backbone of rural economies, or simply hovered on the edges of usefulness. Either way, your job has funded more than one questionable medical experiment and at least a dozen bar tabs. As the warmth seeps back into your limbs, you reach for your journal and scribble a quick note. Murdo's Bessie may be part sheep, monitor for wool. You close the ledger, lean back, and let your eyes close. Outside, the rain murmurs secrets to the moor. Inside, the smell of vinegar, smoke, and old wool mingles into something oddly comforting. Your leeches sway gently from the rafter, Bessie among them now. You exhale, and you rest. Dawn greets you with all the subtlety of a slapped door, a thud on the roof, followed by a cascade of water through the thatch, splashes delicately into the tin basin near your bed. You groan, roll over, and consider the pros and cons of pretending to be dead for the next 12 hours. The cons win mainly because the leeches will wriggle themselves into knots if you don't check them soon. You sit up, your joints protesting like underpaid musicians. The fire has gone cold. The floor greets your feet with a familiar chill of a Highland morning, and the draft under the door reminds you that weather is a thing that happens inside your home just as much as out. Still, you rise, wrap a blanket around your shoulders like a reluctant druid, and shuffle toward the hearth. A few embers remain. You coax them with the gentle encouragement of peat, breath, and curses. The fire revives slowly, out of pity more than obedience. You check on the leeches first. The pouch hangs where you left it, rocking slightly in the draft. You lower it gently and peer inside. Most are still squirming, sluggishly dancing their morning wriggle. One has attached itself to the inside cloth and looks deeply pleased with its choice. You pry it off and gently reposition it in the communal damp corner of the pouch. No favorites. You change the water with your usual care, using rain collected from a clean gutter pipe. Well, cleaner than most. You hum a tune while you work, not because they understand, but because silence this early in the day feels like a threat. Historians still argue whether leech maintenance was considered part of the science of medicine or merely a bothersome afterthought. Apothecaries documented feeding schedules and water temperatures, while collectors like you mostly followed the sniff and hope method. You make your breakfast slightly burnt porridge with an optional topping of last night's regrets. The spoon is cracked, but it does the job. The bowl wobbles slightly, as if trying to escape. You eat slowly, squinting at the window to guess what kind of damp the day intends to offer. As it happens, it's a thick fog kind of morning. You finish your meal, lace your boots still moist, as always, and head out. Today, you've decided to veer off your usual route. The moor is still too sopped from last night's storm, but there's a little stream to the south, the Crooked Beck rumored to have decent leaching if the herons haven't gotten there first. You set off with your stick, your jars, and your deep, lingering sense of anticipation, or possibly dread. The world is silent, not peacefully silent, but that uneasy stillness where every leaf seems to be holding its breath. Even the birds are quiet. It's the kind of morning that feels like a setup. You cross a low ridge and descend into a narrow glen, following the meandering ribbon of the beck. The water here is clearer than the bog's cool, fast-moving, but with enough shallows for leeches to lurk. You crouch and test a pool with your stick. Something bumps it. You wait, then slowly, you wade in. It's colder than you expected. Not just cold insulting. You grit your teeth and hold still. It takes longer in clear water. The leeches are more cautious, or possibly just shy, but eventually, one finds your foot, then another. You smile grimly and start the collection. Half an hour in, you've gathered 4 good specimens, including one with a cheerful little stripe down his back. You name it Stripey for morale. That's when the heron appears. It lands with all the grace of royalty and the cold indifference of a tax collector. It eyes you from the opposite bank with a gaze that says, "Those are mine." You try to ignore it. It steps closer. You hold up your stick like a makeshift scepter. "This patch of water is under temporary lease," you declare. The heron stares. You shuffle upstream, muttering about property rights. The heron follows, matching your pace like a rival in a slow-motion duel. Eventually, it squawks in what you take as resignation and flaps off probably to tell the frogs you're cheating. Quirky tidbit in parts of Wales. Herons were considered the messengers of lake spirits and were thought to sabotage poor fishermen by driving fish into deeper waters. In your case, they seem to specialize in stealing your clients. You return to your leeching, teeth chattering slightly now, but determined. Another hour yields 2 more leeches, one notably sluggish, possibly existential. You decide that's enough for the morning. Climbing out of the stream is less dignified than entering it. You slip once, flail wildly, and narrowly avoid a full-body submersion thanks to a heroic grab for a stunted shrub. The shrub is unimpressed. Back on dry land, you wring out your socks, massage your ankles, and repack your jar. The leeches seem satisfied with their morning's work, though one keeps inching toward the lid with ominous intent. You begin the walk home. The fog has lifted slightly, revealing hills that look like sleeping giants under green blankets. A few birds start to sing, and the wind shifts in your favor, carrying with it the distant smell of hearth fires and someone burning toast. You think about Stripey. You think about Murdo, who might still be trying to feed his prize leech raw lamb in his shed. You think about that heron, and whether it will show up in your dreams wearing a judge's wig. And you keep walking. After a long walk and several heated internal debates about whether bog water has nutritional value, you reach a familiar hollow in the path, a low dip between 2 gorse-covered rises, affectionately known as the Dip of Despair. It earns this name not because it's particularly treacherous, but because it's the only spot on your route where nature insists on reminding you that you are a mortal, biological creature with exactly 0 access to indoor plumbing. You glance around. No humans, only sheep in the distance, staring with a deep judgment of creatures who urinate wherever they like. Nature calls. You scout the terrain and settle behind a suspiciously round boulder. You crouch, shivering, and begin your humble ablutions. The air is brisk, the moss is let's say absorbent, and midges have started a low buzz nearby. Ever hopeful. Just as you begin to reclaim your dignity, a light breeze carries the unmistakable squawk of a grouse. You freeze. Not because of the bird, but because the last time you heard that sound while in such a position, it was followed by old Phaonia appearing from the underbrush and muttering something about bad omens and trousers. You wrap up quickly, reassemble your layers, and step back onto the path. The cold now settled firmly into your bones like a disapproving ancestor. Historians still argue whether ancient Highlanders embraced the wilderness for spiritual reasons, or simply due to the lack of privacy indoors. Communal living, after all, offered warmth and company, but absolutely no opportunity to relieve oneself without an audience of at least 2 uncles and a goat. You trudge onward, marveling at how a body could feel simultaneously drenched and dehydrated. Your scarf is wet again, possibly from mist, possibly from the sheer volume of sighs you've expelled into it. Either way, it clings like a regret. Back on the main trail, you pause for a sip from your water skin, which tastes vaguely of onions. This is because you once used it to transport leek soup, a decision that continues to haunt every cup you pour from it. Still, hydration is hydration, and your options are limited. The sun, now peeking cautiously through the cloud cover, casts long slanting rays across the heather. The moor seems to brighten, though only just. Somewhere to your left, a fox dashes through the underbrush, carrying something suspiciously sock-like. You offer a silent prayer for whoever's laundry it was. Your thoughts drift, as they often do on long walks, to philosophical matters, not the grand questions of existence, more the humble ones, like, what is the optimal sock material for swamp conditions? Why does porridge never truly cool down, and do leeches dream? Quirky tidbit: some medieval texts suggest that leeches, if kept too long without feeding, would become sullen and refuse to work. One 14th century physician allegedly tried cheering them up with music. The results were disappointing, though the harpsichord player got a promotion. As you walk, your foot catches on something half buried in the path. You stumble, flail, and right yourself with an acrobatic flourish that would have impressed exactly no one. Curious, you dig around the offending object and discover a bent iron buckle, rusted, but still shaped like the kind found on old sporrans. You slip it into your pouch. You'll add it to the collection of unimportant curiosities you keep in a box under your bed. It's not hoarding if it's historical. Not far now. You pass the twisted pine where the crows nest, a place of local legend. Some say if you pass it without greeting, you'll lose something important, a coin, a glove, or your sense of purpose. You tip your hat, just in case. You've misplaced enough already. The wind picks up again as you cross the final stretch, and the village emerges once more, nestled like a lopsided patchwork quilt of roofs, smoke, and squabbling chickens. You feel the familiar weight in your shoulders lessen, not physically. Of course, your kit is still heavy, your boots still filled with swamp memories, but there's something soothing about seeing your own sagging roof come into view. Historians still debate whether Highlanders' sense of home was rooted more in community or land. You'd say it's both. You can't trust a man who doesn't wave to a neighbor, or one who can't tell the difference between 3 types of mud by smell alone. You reach your door, brush off a small family of determined beetles, and step inside. First thing, hang the leeches. You check the morning's catch, noting that Stripey has, in fact, escaped the main group and is now attached to the cloth with the lazy elegance of someone reclining in a very damp hammock. You nudge him gently back into the fold. Then, your boots come off. They squelch like overripe fruit. You upend them near the hearth, where they ooze regret. Finally, you sit, not elegantly, not with grace, just sit fully, completely, with the kind of slump that could pass for structural collapse. Your eyes drift to the window, where the last light of day filters through the mist and into your little home. The leeches dangle, the fire flickers. Somewhere, Murdo is probably trying to teach his leeches to spell. And you've survived another full cycle of bogs, bites, breezes, and brief exposure. The fire crackles softly now, coaxed back to life with a handful of dry heather and a generous helping of wishful thinking. You sit at your table, legs stretched under the worn wood, with the peculiar mix of exhaustion and alertness that often follows a long day of being damp in entirely new places. It's time to eat again. You lift the lid off a small pot that's been warming by the hearth. Inside is something that technically qualifies as stew root vegetables, floating in a thin broth with the occasional appearance of a mystery bean. You stir it with a spoon that once had a handle, now replaced with a bit of knotted twine and hope. You ladle a portion into a chip bowl and sit back, blowing on the surface. It steams weakly, like it's embarrassed to be seen. The first bite is soft and vaguely carrot adjacent. The second has something crunchy in it, and you don't pursue the identity. Still, it's warm, and that's enough. You eat slowly, spoon scraping the bowl in that familiar rhythm that feels almost meditative. Outside, the wind begins its evening shift, tapping at the shutters like a curious raccoon. You eye the latch still secure. You once had a hen sneak in during a storm. You only noticed when she started snoring under the bed. As you chew, your gaze drifts to the shelf above the fireplace. It holds a small, motley assortment of items, a rock that looks like a face, a feather you were once convinced was magical, and a perfectly round stone that turned out to be a cannonball from some forgotten skirmish. And of course, your prized leech jar from last summer, the one that once held 17 leeches and survived a fall from a cart during a particularly enthusiastic sheep chase. Quirky tidbit in parts of rural France. Leeches were once used in love potions boiled with herbs, dried, then ground into powder and sprinkled into wine. Results were mixed. One man proposed to a cabbage. You finish your stew and rinse the bowl with a splash of boiled water from the kettle, setting it upside down on the hearth to dry. The room now smells faintly of onion and peat, your signature blend. With no pressing tasks left and darkness settling over the hills, you do something you rarely admit to anyone. Even yourself, you indulge in a bit of light reading. From under your bed, you slide out a small wooden box, its lid carved with the image of a thistle, and a frog, your attempt at heraldry. Inside is a collection of notes, observations, and, yes, a few secret drawings. You leaf through them, pausing at a sketch of a leech wearing a top hat and monocle. The caption reads Lord Bitesworth, Esq, retired. You chuckle quietly, a soft sound that surprises you. Historians still argue whether humor had a place in the daily life of Highlanders struggling against nature and poverty. You argue it was essential. Without it, how else does one explain poetry about turnips or competitive yodeling across glens? You turn the page to a newer entry. a list of possible improvements to your leech kit. Among them, cork lids with actual cork, not bark. Waterproof trousers, pipe dream. Leech cozy for cold mornings, investigate feasibility. Your pen hovers over the page. You add another bribe it local heron. The fire snaps cheerfully as if approving your plans. You close the box, slide it back, and stretch. Your back pops like an old chest. You reach for the teapot and pour the last of your nettle brew into a tin cup, sipping it as you gaze out the small window. Outside, the moon has risen, framed between the ragged edges of your thatch. A few stars blink weakly through the mist, and the wind hums a low tune through the eaves. The leeches above you are still. You like to think they sleep, or at least plot in quiet. You finish your tea and begin your nightly routine, such as it is. You check the door latch again, twist it twice for luck. You bank the fire with a fresh log and a stern warning. You lay out your sleeping roll by the hearth, the same spot you've slept in for years, close enough to the warmth to avoid frostbite, but far enough to dodge sparks. And finally, you remove your belt, which has been digging into your side since midday, and mutter thanks to no one in particular. You crawl into your blankets, scratchy but familiar, and pull them up to your chin. Your eyes drift closed as your mind replays the day in reverse: the bog, the breeze, the bite, the barter. You've made it through another one. Historians may never know the names of every man and woman who waded into the muck to deliver wriggling relief to the ailing masses, but you know. You lived it. You are it. And tomorrow there will be more mud. But for now, rest. Morning arrives less like a gentle suggestion, and more like an abrupt landlord demanding rent. The sky outside your window glows a dull pewter, and a persistent drip from the eaves taps out a rhythm that suggests both time's passage and mild irritation. You lie still for a moment beneath your woolen cocoon, feeling the stiff ache in your spine and a general sensation of having been partially fermented overnight. Eventually, and with a sound like a rusty hinge, you sit up. Your first conscious thought is, where is that smell coming from? It takes a moment before you realize it's the leech pouch. You bolt upright, cross the room in 3 limps and a stumble, and retrieve the swaying linen sack from its hook. A sniff confirms it. One of your specimens has gone off. Not metaphorically. One has, quite literally, perished and fermented. Possibly from despair. Possibly from whatever it ate before you found it. You wince, unlace the pouch, and peer in. The culprit floats listlessly near the edge of the water, surrounded by a faint green haze that does not inspire confidence. The others seem unbothered, but you are not so lucky. Carefully, you remove the expired one using a cloth and the longest spoon you own and dispose of it in the garden midden, where even the rats will think twice. Quirky tidbit in parts of 18th century Hungary. Spoiled leeches were burned in rituals to ward off sickness, though some claim the smell caused it. You return inside, refill the pouch with clean rainwater, and give the surviving leeches a gentle swirl. They respond with mild, gelatinous enthusiasm. Stripey, bless him, does a little somersault, which you interpret as either celebration or mild trauma. After breakfast, more porridge, now 30% more lumpy. You turn your attention to your kit. The jar is intact, if slightly stained. Your stick, still proudly called the Wriggler Wrangler, has a splinter that needs smoothing. Your pouches are dryish. It's time to prepare for the next sale, which means sorting and selecting the liveliest of your recent catch. You line them up on a strip of damp muslin like squirmy little sausages. You watch carefully who's wriggling most, who looks eager, who, like you, is simply tired but too stubborn to quit. As you make your selections, there's a knock at the door. This time, it's not Murdo, it's Maisie. Maisie the apothecary, cloaked in black wool and suspicion, holding a basket that smells faintly of lavender and boiling disappointment. You open the door, she doesn't smile. You said you'd have 6 ready, she says. You gesture toward your table. 7. One's a bit dramatic, though. She steps inside, sniffs, and inspects each leech with the scrutiny of someone judging a baking competition. They'll do, she mutters, though you suspect she'd say that even if they danced a jig for her. Maisie pays in real coin, not barter, and gives you a quick update on the local medical scene. 2 fevers, 1 goat bite, and a case of suspected romantic melancholy. She suspects the melancholic one has simply had to eat his own cooking. You nod solemnly. Tragic. Historians still argue whether Highland apothecaries were closer to healers or hedge witches. The truth lies somewhere between tinctures and tact. Maisie leans more toward tinctures and occasional glaring. As she leaves, you tuck the coins into a tin and cross another entry into your ledger. Today, sale of 6. 1 casualty. And a note that Maisie smelled faintly of sage and ominous intent. With a trade complete, you're free for the afternoon. Free time is a rare and precious thing for a man of your profession. Most days it's filled with walking, waiting, or mending the aftermath of either. But today, with no immediate bogs calling your name, you decide to engage in a ritual so ancient, so sacred, it almost defies description. You decide to tidy up. Not extensively, of course, just enough to remove the obvious layers of damp. You lift your boots from beside the fire and discover a small mushroom growing underneath one. It looks healthy. You leave it be, might be useful in soup. You shake out your blanket, air the leech pouch by the window, and sweep the floor with a broom that's lost most of its bristles and all of its optimism. The dust you stir rises in a puff and settles again like it never left. You find a sock under the table that you're fairly certain isn't yours. Quirky bit in Victorian England. There were leech collectors who advertised home delivery bringing live leeches directly to customers. A few even dressed them up in tiny hats for children's amusement. You shudder at the thought of formal wear for Stripey. As you sweep, you find your mind wandering again to the notion of dignity. It's a strange thing. Dignity, hard to measure, harder to maintain when you spend most of your day knee-deep in swamps, whispering sweet nothings to carnivorous worms. And yet, there's something deeply dignified about survival, about doing something unpleasant because someone has to, because someone always has. You pause, lean on your broom, and watch a shaft of sunlight pierce the window. Dust motes dance in the beam like lazy fairies. You smile faintly, a rare thing, sunlight in these parts. You nod to it in greeting. And just as you consider sitting down to carve another notch in your Wriggler Wrangler or sketch a new leech family crest, there's another knock at the door. You raise an eyebrow. Who now? You open the door slowly, cautiously, like a man who has learned that most unexpected knocks carry either trouble or murdo. But today, it's neither. It's Finley the butcher, holding a basket with a blood-stained cloth draped casually over the top and wearing the harried expression of someone who has just chased a pig through a courtyard and lost He gives you a look somewhere between desperation and optimism. Got anything fresh, he asks. You blink. Leeches or turnips? Leeches, he says, peering past you like he might spot them dancing a jig on your table. My cousin's boy's got a swelling behind the ear. Maisie says, leech it. I say, let's ask the expert. You arch an eyebrow. And what's in the basket? Compensation, Finlay says, unveiling the cloth to reveal 2 links of sausage still warm, and a small slab of what might be liver or a very confused beetroot. You invite him in, because you've never once said no to warm sausage. Inside, Finlay sets the basket on the table while you inspect the leech pouch. You pick out 2 sprightly specimens and lower them into a glass jar with a splash of water. One promptly suctions to the side like it's trying to prove a point. Satisfied, you cork the jar and hand it over. He gives the sausage a little pat, like a thank you, appreciate it. If it doesn't help, we'll try goose fat and a prayer. Tell the lad to keep it still, you say. They're twitchy today. Historians still argue whether leech application was better suited to barbers or butchers, many of whom served both roles in rural towns. Some even offered bleeding and beef deals, though that phrase never quite caught on. Finlay eyes the leeches one last time, mutters something about nature being clever and awful, and disappears into the fog, the jar clinking softly in his coat pocket. You stare at the sausages. They stare back. You eat one with reverence, standing by the hearth like a priest at a very small, greasy altar. The flavor is smoky, meaty, and suspiciously free of turnip, a rare luxury. Rejuvenated by pork and purpose, you decide to visit the market again, not to sell, but to see what nonsense is being peddled today. You pull on your coat, still slightly damp, as is tradition, and head down the muddy track into the village square. It's market day proper, which means more than 3 stalls and at least 1 man pretending to be a wizard. Sure enough, Archie the fishmonger is there, draped in a curtain, shouting predictions at passers-by. He's never been right, but he has strong opinions and louder lungs. You pass old Nan selling her infamous spice cakes, which taste like they've fought in a war. A few children run by, one holding what looks like a turnip on a stick, a Highland lollipop. And at the end of the square stands an unfamiliar cart. It's glossy, polished. The wheels don't even squeak. A banner hangs over it, declaring in elaborate lettering, Dr. Percival Worthing's traveling cabinet of remedies and curiosities. You stop. You stare. You wonder if the sausage has given you hallucinations. Dr. Percival himself stands behind the cart, wearing a top hat, a waistcoat of too many colors, and a grin that's far too white for someone who spent time in the Highlands. On the table before him are small bottles, tins, packets, and, yes, unbelievably tiny gold-capped jars of leeches. You approach cautiously. He beams. A connoisseur of the medicinal arts. Care for a tincture of powdered ox spleen. You shake your head slowly. I collect leeches. He raises an eyebrow. Impressed. A colleague. Then I've sourced these from the finest Italian bogs, hand-harvested at dawn by virgins. You glance at the jar. The leeches inside look lifeless, like they've been embalmed for presentation. One floats upside down, motionless. You lift the jar, tilt it, no wriggle. You set it down and meet the doctor's gaze. These are dead. He waves a hand dramatically, dormant, suspended in serenity, activated by the tincture of chamomile and optimism. You give him a long, slow look. They're floating like regret. Doctor, Worthing does not appreciate the joke. He claps the lid on the jar and turns to the next villager, launching into a monologue about powdered rabbit knuckles. Historians still debate whether traveling doctors like Worthing were dangerous frauds or simply the only healthcare option in remote areas. The truth is likely both. Many brought genuine knowledge, but more brought bottles of snake oil and suspicious cologne. You walk away, amused and mildly insulted. The village deserves better. They deserve leeches with ambition, not well-preserved imposters. You stop by Elspeth's for a quick dram, which she serves with a grunt and an eye roll, and linger a moment by the fire before heading back into the afternoon chill. By the time you return home, the fog has thickened again. Your house welcomes you with creaks and damp, and the familiar smell of moss and boiled lint. You hang your coat, stoke the fire, and hang the rest of the sausages near the chimney to smoke. You return to your journal and pen a new entry. Dr. Percival Worthing, not a doctor, possibly a furniture salesman, leeches unresponsive. One had a mustache. You close the journal, smile to yourself, and poke the fire with your Wriggler Wrangler. It hisses in approval. Outside, the wind picks up. Inside, you enjoy the strange satisfaction of being a small, vital part of a very damp system, one sausage, one swindle, and one good leech at a time. After an unusually exciting market day involving imposter leeches, sausage diplomacy, and an unsolicited tincture demonstration, you settle back into your regular evening rhythm, which today means popping into the tavern to catch the latest swirl of local gossip. The gasping stag is already alive with chatter by the time you arrive. The low hum of voices blending with the occasional clink of mugs and the eternal creak of the sign outside, swinging like a pendulum of poor decisions. You nod to Elspeth, who gestures toward your usual corner with a mug already in hand. She knows you too well. The drink is hot, herbal, and just on the safe side of flammable. As you sit, you catch the end of a story being told by young Ewan, the sort of man who always looks surprised to find himself in a room, especially if the room contains facts. So there he is, Ewan says, eyes wide, covered in nettles, trousers full of frogs, shouting at the moon, claiming he's found the queen of the fairies. The table erupts in laughter. Someone claps. Someone chokes on a bit of smoked herring. You sip your drink and listen as the tales spiral out like so much spilt stew. Tonight, the gossip mill is working double time. An Englishman has arrived in the next village over, asking where he can hire a haggis for his wedding feast. Someone's been leaving turnips carved like faces outside doorways. No one knows if it's a prank, a warning, or a new artistic movement. Murdo has been seen talking to his leeches. Not unusual, but this time he was also listening. You're just about to offer a toast to turnip artists when Big Nile turns to you with a grin. Heard you had a run-in with that fancy doctor today. Worthing, was it? You nod. His leeches are deceased, possibly embalmed. One was wearing rouge. This gets a round of hoots and a few exclamations about witchcraft. Someone suggests you challenge the man to a leech duel, which you suspect would involve more slapping than science. Historians still argue whether taverns were incubators of folklore or just places where truth went to take a nap. But you know well enough, half the stories told here are nonsense. The other half, also nonsense, but with better timing. Just then, the door bangs open, and a rush of cold air and wet wool barrels in. It's young Tilda, breathless and wild-eyed, holding what appears to be a turnip with a hat. Everyone stares. She lifts the vegetable like a relic. It spoke, she says solemnly, a beat of silence. Big Nile raises his mug. Was it asking for better seasoning? Tilda glares. It said, "You will not find the goat." Then it blinked. You sip your drink and mentally jot this down under unsolved mysteries. Turnip division. Quirky tidbit in a few remote glens. Turnips were once carved and placed on windowsills to ward off evil spirits, an ancient custom that may have also served as a form of passive-aggressive communication with neighbors. You nurse your drink and take in the room the warmth of peat smoke, the familiar smell of damp coats and questionable ale, the firelight dancing off old mugs and older stories. The wind howls outside, trying to get in. It can wait. Eventually, the crowd begins to thin. Someone snores softly by the hearth. The turnip rests on a stool, wearing its hat like a crown. You thank Elspeth with a nod and step back into the night. The fog has settled again, heavier now, curling through the village like a curious cat. You walk slowly, your boots squishing on the path, your breath fogging in front of you. You pass the well, now silent and still, past the coop where the chickens sleep like small, suspicious clouds, past the old cart that's been leaning against the blacksmith's wall for so long it might qualify as a heritage site. You pause at your door. From across the road, in the dark, you hear something. A squelch, then a faint hum. A voice, Murdo's singing a lullaby to what might be Bessie the Leech. You choose not to investigate. Inside, you light a lamp, remove your boots, and hang your scarf. The sausages still smoke gently near the chimney. The leeches sway in their pouch like tiny, aquatic wind chimes. You sit. You scratch a few notes in your journal. Tavern quiet, except for talking vegetables. Locals concerned, mostly amused. Weather still indecisive. Consider patenting emotional support leeches. You close the book, bank the fire, and settle under your blankets with a full belly and a head full of nonsense. Outside, the fog thickens. Inside, you sleep. The next morning begins with a low rattle from the roof and a sound you've come to dread, the sharp, rhythmic tap of something decidedly not rain on the windowsill. You open one eye, blink into the semi-darkness, and wait. There it is again. Tap, tap, tap. You sit up slowly, the blanket cocoon falling away like a wilted cabbage leaf, and creep over to the window. You push aside the curtain to reveal a large crow, glaring at you with the sort of intensity normally reserved for tax auditors. In its beak, it holds what appears to be a leech. No, it's a worm. A very damp, very insulted worm. The crow stares, drops the worm with a squelch, and flaps away in a flurry of existential judgment. You stare at the worm stares back. You close the curtain. Today, you're scheduled to visit Maisie again. Not for business, but for bartering. She's rumored to have acquired a jar of dried juniper berries gold in these parts, for anyone attempting to brew anything more ambitious than bog water tea. You pull on your best kilt, by which you mean the one with fewer holes than pride, and prepare your offering a pouch of leech slime, carefully strained, and a bundle of dried mugwort. Yes, leech slime. Don't look at me like that. It's a known ingredient in certain salves. Historians still argue whether this counts as applied medicine or witchcraft with paperwork. As you walk to her cottage, the path is lined with glistening puddles and crows. Always the crows. One hops beside you for a stretch, occasionally cawing as if giving you directions. You ignore it. You know this route better than your own boots, which is to say, poorly, but with conviction. Maisie's home is nestled behind a copse of birch trees, their white bark peeling like gossip. Her doors painted a deep blue, chipped in places but still defiant. You knock. A long pause, then the sound of shuffling. The door opens, revealing Maisie in a shawl, an apron, and an expression that suggests she's been up since before the concept of rest was invented. You brought the slime? You nod and hand it over. She inspects it in the light, holds it to her nose, then to her ear. You're unsure if this is part of the process or just a hobby. Fair, she says, and returns with a jar of juniper berries. I threw in some dried mint. You look like you need it. You thank her, tuck the goods into your satchel, and turn to go, but she stops you. Have you seen the boy? You blinked. What boy? She frowns. The one who was supposed to bring me eelskins yesterday. Said he'd be back by dusk. He's not. Family's worried. Thought maybe you'd passed him on your rounds. You shake your head slowly. No eel boys, just worms and rumors. She nods, absently chewing her lip, then closes the door. You walk back through the mist, thinking, missing eelskin delivery boys, whispering turnips, leech charlatans. It's shaping up to be a very strange week, even by your standards. Back home, you set the mint and berries aside, pour yourself a cup of weak tea, and sit by the fire. Your leeches twitch gently in their pouch above the hearth. You check them still healthy, still wriggling, Stripey still a performer. You note in your ledger, morning delivery successful, crows expressive, local economy odd but functional, mystery boy pending. To distract yourself, you decide to clean your gear. You begin with your jars, scrubbing each carefully with a rag and a mix of ash and vinegar. The scent is invigorating. If your idea of invigoration is a slightly scorched salad dressing. Next, the Wriggler Wrangler. Its end is starting to splinter again, so you shave it carefully with your pocket knife. You consider carving a small decoration into the handle, a leech, a crow, a leech riding a crow. You make a note to think on it. Quirky tidbit: some ancient leech collectors in India trained birds, ibises, and herons to indicate leech-infested waters by pecking the ground nearby. The practice died out after several birds unionized. With your gear cleaned and the fire crackling, you step outside for air. The moor is quiet, too quiet. You follow the curve of the path to the eastern ridge, where you sometimes collect herbs and peer out at the boggy sprawl beyond. From here, you can see the curve of the loch and the shadow of the standing stone beyond it. You pause. There, at the edge of the bog, a flicker of movement. You squint. Too tall for a fox, too short for Murdo, and definitely too clean. You frown, clutch your stick, and begin walking. The wind picks up, and with it, the faint scent of peat and pine. You walk faster, because now you're thinking not just about leeches and slime and rogue sausages. You're thinking about the missing boy, and what he might have found in the bog. You pick your way across the moor with the caution of a man who's both seen things and sat in most of them. The grass is slick, the ground uneven, and your boots are once again expressing their displeasure through passive-aggressive squelches. The movement you saw earlier has vanished, swallowed by the fog like a lie told too quietly. Still, something urges you forward: curiosity, perhaps, or that rare feeling that something has gone wrong that isn't strictly your fault. As you descend toward the edge of the loch, the terrain shifts underfoot. What was firm becomes spongy. What was spongy becomes alarmingly slurpable. You recognize this spot. It's where the sheep refuse to graze and where Murda once lost a shoe and an entire afternoon. You pause by the old standing stone, tall, lichen-covered, and suspiciously shaped like a finger pointing somewhere very unhelpful. Children used to dare each other to touch it with bare hands, convinced it would whisper secrets or curses. You touched it once. All it whispered was a drafty breeze and the realization that you'd left your lunch at home. You listen now. Nothing, no whisper, no crows, no frogs. Too quiet. Then you see it just past the stone, by the edge of a shallow pool, a small bundle of fabric, muddy and still. You approach slowly, heart doing a very unimpressive sort of gallop. It's a boy's cloak, empty, damp, torn at the hem. You crouch and turn it over. No blood, no tracks, just water, mud, and one very old coin tucked inside the collar. Strange. You pocket the coin gently and look around. No sign of the boy, but nearby, you notice something else, a trail of broken reeds and a small, neat, wriggling figure just at the water's edge. A leech, not yours. It's long, dark, and sluggish. You prod it with your stick. It oozes into the water like a secret. You straighten slowly, scanning the shoreline, and then you see them leeches, dozens of them, scattered like punctuation marks around the shallows. Some moving, some still. Something here is wrong. Historians still debate whether certain bogs in the Highlands developed microclimates that favored unusual species. Some even believe isolated pools bred unique strains of leech, larger or more aggressive than the typical variety. One tale tells of a leech so large it could drain a sheep, though most assume that was just Murdo's attempt to explain a poor shearing. You return to the cloak, gently fold it, and tuck it under your arm. The wind shifts behind you cooler now, with a scent like rust and rain. You begin the walk back, not fast, but with purpose. Your boots suck at the mud with every step, unwilling to release you to dry land without protest. Back home, you hang the cloak by the fire and sit dripping, pondering. You examine the coin, old, tarnished, Roman perhaps, or just very determined to look ancient. You rub it gently and consider its presence. Why would a village boy carry such a thing? You pour yourself a mug of nettle tea and sip, deep in thought. The leeches sway in their pouch, unaware of the mystery mounting in your lap. You fetch your ledger, add an entry. Cloak recovered near standing stone. Strange leech activity. Coin suggests antiquity or dramatic flair. No sign of boy, only silence. You tap your pen on the table, then turn the page to an older entry, one from last year, when a traveling herbalist stayed in the village for 3 nights and claimed to have seen a man made of water near the bog. You dismissed it, of course, at the time, but today, you glance at your stick, the Wriggler Wrangler. It's more than just a tool. It's your walking companion, your jar defender, and now, possibly, your only weapon against mysterious damp entities. Quirky tidbit in ancient Celtic folklore. Bogs were considered sacred portals, thresholds between worlds. Offerings were left trinkets, weapons, even people. Some say the water remembers, some say it judges. You take out the coin again. You consider returning it to the bog, but not tonight. Tonight, you hang the coin above your hearth, just to watch it. Just in case. You bank the fire, check the door, and listen once more. Still no whisper. Still no boy. By morning, the mystery has lodged itself deep in your mind like a splinter, refusing to be soothed by porridge. tea, or even a particularly spirited cleaning of your leech jars. You keep glancing at the coin, now hung above the hearth on a loop of old twine, as though it might start glowing or confess its secrets aloud. It does not. Still, you feel watched, not by people, most of whom are too busy with sheep or weather-based small talk, but by something older, wetter, and less interested in social pleasantries. After checking your leeches, Stripey remains chipper. You set out again, this time without jars, pouches, or intent to collect. Today's mission is investigation, or, more realistically, poking around a bog while muttering questions to yourself like a man recently divorced from reason. You pass Murdo's place on the way out. He's in a yard, attempting to construct what appears to be a tiny raft. You pause, raise a brow. He waves. "Building Bessie afloat," he says cheerfully. "Why, she deserves a treat." You nod slowly and continue. Some questions are best left in the mud. Your route takes you past the apothecaries again. Maisie isn't out front, but her cat is perched atop a barrel, staring at you like it's memorizing your face for future vengeance. You tip your cap. "Good morning, Lieutenant." The cat does not blink. Historians still argue whether the omnipresence of cats in Highland medicine was due to practical vermin control or some sort of feline conspiracy. Either way, Maisie's cat has never once been seen running or smiling. You reach the moor again, retracing your steps from the day before. The standing stone looms ahead, unbothered by your scrutiny. You stop beside it, kneel, and inspect the ground. The cloak's drag marks are still visible, now softened by dew and the gentle erosion of sheep hooves. The reeds here remain disturbed. The leeches are gone. You walk the shoreline slowly, eyes scanning for signs, cloth, prints, anything out of place. After an hour, you find something unexpected. A series of deliberate scratches in the bark of a birch tree nearby. 3 vertical lines, a space, then 1 horizontal slash. You frown. It's not much of a symbol, but it's something, not initials, not natural. A mark, a message. You make a mental note and gently copy it into your journal with a stick of charcoal. Quirky tidbit in several Highland tales. Bogs were said to mark those they chose, sometimes with strange dreams, sometimes with odd symbols appearing on trees, stones, or most inconveniently skin. You leave the loch with more questions than answers, which is beginning to feel like a theme. Back home, you pull out your ledger and turn to a section you rarely share. The oddities page. You log the symbol, its location, and your theory, either a trail marker or a warning, possibly both. You add it below earlier entries. Glowing mushroom near Murdo's gate. Goose with single red feather that screamed once Stripey's jar shook itself last Thursday? Still unexplained. You glance up at the coin. It hasn't moved. Still, you feel a shift, internal, external. Hard to say. Something in the village is waiting, watching. You step outside for air and find old Hammy sitting on your doorstep. You jump. He doesn't. "Evenin'," he says, despite it being barely past noon. "Heard you found the cloak." You nod. Didn't say much. You spying now? Wasn't hard. You walk like a man narrating his own life. You sigh and sit beside him. He pulls a flask from his coat and offers it. You sip. It tastes like old pine needles and intent. You cough. "I seen marks like that before," he says. "On the old stone near the burned mill. Same kind. Thought it was a drunk shepherd. And now I think we're being watched." You glance at him. By what? Hammy shrugs. Water remembers. You say nothing for a long moment. He nods toward your house. Keep your leeches close tonight. You blink. Is that medical advice? Spiritual, he says, rising and hobbling off down the path like a damp prophet. You watch him go, then return inside. The air feels heavier now. Your leeches sway in their pouch like they've heard everything and agreed. You write in your ledger, Hammy suspects eldritch surveillance. Will monitor coin. Keep Wriggler Wrangler within reach. You bank the fire, light your lamp, and listen. Outside, the bog breathes. Inside, you wait. Sleep does not come easily that night. You lie under your blanket, the fire whispering low in the hearth, your eyes fixed on the coin above it. It gleams faintly, catching the flickering light like a pupil that never blinks. The leeches sway gently in their pouch, silent save for the occasional soft splash of one brushing the linen. Stripey has attached himself, upside down, to the inner corner of the bag, again his signature sleeping pose. You envy him his peace. Outside, the wind picks up. You hear it murmur against the walls, rattle the shutters, and swirl around the chimney in uneasy spirals. It isn't the usual Highland howl. This wind feels hesitant, like it's carrying messages and waiting to be understood. Eventually, you do sleep, and you dream. You're standing by the bog again, barefoot, your feet sinking into the mud. The standing stone looms larger than usual, its surface slick and veined like old marble. It hums not audibly, but with a sensation that sits behind your teeth. A figure stands by the water. You can't see its face. It leans over the lock, not touching, just watching. And then it turns. And it has no face at all, just water where a head should be. You try to run, but the bog holds you. It doesn't pull, not violently, it just holds. You wake up sweating under wool. The fire has gone cold. You sit up and listen. Nothing. You cross the room and check the coin. Still there. But the twine holding it has frayed. As if chewed. You retie it without comment. Historians still argue whether dreams in folklore were considered omens or the side effects of poor ventilation. Some say the bogs held ancient spirits, half remembered by earth and water. Others blame bad soup. You choose not to decide just yet. After sunrise, you gather your things. Not your collecting kit today. Just your boots, your stick, and a lantern. You walk east, beyond the familiar trails, past the hollow where the sheep gather, past the old stone wall where someone once carved the word hush, and no one dared fix it. The air feels heavier today. The ground seems quieter. You reach the place Hammy mentioned, the old mill, long since fallen into itself like a house forgetting how to be. And there, just as he said, is the stone, and on it, the same markings. 3 vertical lines, a space, 1 horizontal slash. Fresh. You touch it. The stone is warm. You pull out your journal and copy it again, this time adding a note. Symbol not weathered, new, bog nearby, water smells odd, possible path or ward. You turn back toward the village, but you don't make it far before you see it. Just off the trail, caught in the crook of a birch tree, another cloak, this one larger, weathered. You approach cautiously. It's pinned in place with a piece of stone, smooth, flat, and carved. Not scratched, carved. The same symbol. You lift the cloak. Nothing beneath it but moss and old leaves. You take the stone. You carry it with you. Back at home, You place it beside the coin. Together, they look like pieces of a game you haven't learned the rules to. You sit down and write. Second cloak, second mark, no tracks, no signs of struggle. Possible boundary stones, leech behavior normal. Stripey contemplative. You sip your tea slowly, eyes on the hearth. Then you notice it. A small smear of something on your door frame. Red-brown, fresh, finger-sized. You approach, heart suddenly thudding. It's not blood. At least, you hope not. It smells faintly of earth, like bog water left too long in a jar. You wipe it clean, but it leaves a feeling behind. A pressure, a warning. Quirky tidbit in early Highland rituals. Doorways were marked with peat or ash to keep spirits from crossing. It didn't always work. Sometimes the markings were found inside the house. That night, you double-check your latch. You lay out your Wriggler Wrangler at arm's reach. You tuck the coin under your pillow. And you try not to dream. The morning after the mark on the doorframe, you don't wake up so much as you emerge slowly, reluctantly from a night spent half asleep and wholly alert. You stretch under your blanket with the grace of a rusted hinge, glance around, and exhale when everything appears to be where you left it. The coin still under your pillow, the leeches wriggling normally, the door still shut. You shuffle to the window and push it open, half expecting to find the bog looming closer, or perhaps Murdo juggling toads in the yard. But there's only mist heavy, blanketing, and slightly warmer than usual. You make a simple breakfast and eat it slowly, pausing now and then to listen. Not because you hear anything unusual yet, but because the silence feels like it's holding its breath. You add a new note to your ledger, mist thicker than usual, no crow sightings, possibly a strike, dreamless night, which is somehow worse. After tending to your leeches, who seem calm but unusually still, you set off to speak with Maisie. If anyone knows the patterns of strange happenings, it's her. She answers her door quickly this time, eyes sharper than usual, sleeves rolled up, the apothecary smells of rosemary and mild panic. You saw the mark, she says without preamble. You nod. I've had 3 people show up this morning with dreams they don't remember but feel like bruises. One of them woke up in the bog, dry, not muddy, just there. You sit at her table, fingers wrapped around a mug of aggressively herbal tea. Maisie lowers her voice. There are stories, she says, about places where the ground gets thin, places where things look back, places that pull. You glance out her window, and what do they want? No one agrees. She replies, some say offerings, some say memory, some say nothing at all, just watching, like leeches. They don't hate, they don't think, they just take. You leave with a fresh bundle of sage and a warning. If you see a second mark on your home, don't stay the night. You walk home slower this time, eyes scanning trees, rocks, shadows. When you reach your door, you stop. There, carved neatly above the lintel, the mark. You don't go inside. Instead, you turn and walk to the village green, to Elspeth's, to the only place still lit at this hour. You explain. You speak the symbol aloud. You watch her face pale. Without a word, she gives you the key to the storeroom behind the tavern, a dusty corner with firewood, crates of turnips, and a cot for visiting shepherds with bad timing. You sleep there, and this time you dream again. Not of the bog, of home, of a door you can't open, of leeches still in their jars, whispering in pulses. In the morning, the mist has lifted. You return home with a gut full of caution. The mark above your door is gone. Wiped clean, not scraped, not weathered, gone. Inside, everything is as you left it except the leeches. The pouch is on the floor, the jar is tipped. Stripey is gone. You sit down, slowly, next to the hearth. You breathe. You write. The mark was erased. Stripey missing, possibly wandered. No trace of second symbol. Mist lifted, still watching. We'll go leeching tomorrow. Routine is anchor. You stare at the fire, and for the first time in days, you don't listen for whispers. You let the silence hold you, and eventually, you begin to feel whole again. And now, the moor grows quiet. The wind has eased to a gentle breath, soft against the hills, stirring only the tops of the heather as if tucking it in for the night. The loch lies still, a mirror of moonlight and memory, reflecting not just the sky, but all that's been carried across its surface: boots, cloaks, stories, and silence. Your fire burns low, casting long shadows across the stone walls, flickering gently over the faces of the old leech jars and weathered boots. The room is warm in its way, more from presence than temperature, more from familiarity than fire. The leeches, those quiet little creatures of strange medicine and older myths, swayed gently in their pouch above the hearth. They know nothing of mystery or marks or dreams. They just float in rhythm with the slow, steady lull of night. And you, wrapped in your blanket, feel the ache begin to soften in your shoulders, in your knees, in your mind. The day is over. The strange will wait. The bog, patient and ancient, will still be there come morning. Outside, the mist begins to settle once more, not as a threat this time, but as a hush, a final curtain on the strange little stage of the Highlands. A closing breath. You close your eyes. Let the story fade. Let the night take you, gently, into a sleep undisturbed by leeches, by lore, or by the scratching wind. Just stillness. Just rest. Just the whisper of moorland in your dreams.